And we're back. Let's see. Jag trycker på mix, men det hjälper inte.
Nej, men den lyser upp.
Vilken lyser rött? Jag ser ingenting som lyser rött här. Det är inget som lyser rött. Det borde fungera.
Vi gör så här.
Ja, den hänger sig. Det är inte så ofta vi gör det. Så. Nu så.
That's better. Okay, so fortunately no commercial messages. So today we'll talk about Agile and then Scrum in particular. Before we do that, I need to talk to you about something more philosophical. I can't stop myself. So, do you know, have you read this, that if you compress Earth to down to maximum density, do you know how big it becomes? Meaning that you eliminate the distances between all the particles, right? So you compress Earth. The size of it is about the size of a pea, right? Okay, now, so consequently, if you were to compress yourself down to maximum density, it would be even smaller, right? It would just be a fraction of that pea, right? What does that tell you? It tells you that in your normal state, we have the density you have, you're essentially just a sparse structure of particles, where the distances between two particles is huge compared to the size of the individual particles, right? So that's what we are. We're just structures of particles, and on top of that, these particles are replaced all the time. I mean, they're kind of debating it. There might be some particles that are never replaced, but the vast majority of particles that are part of this structure right now are replaced within months. Right? So it kind of, two things here. Kind of begs the question. One is, who are you? Are you this structure of particles? Or are you the void filling this structure of particles? Because it's mostly void. It's mostly nothing. And the thing is that that void is exactly the same as the void outside. Right? It's just a sparse structure of particles, constantly being replaced. Most of the particles are replaced by something in exactly the same position, but as we know, we kind of decay over time, right? So that's kind of one thought here. So who am I, right? From this physics, but this is physics, right? And the other observation here is, okay, so with this structure of particles, now we're planted on the surface of this Earth, right? And we're held down to this surface because of gravity, right? But you know, Earth rotates at the speed of a few thousand kilometers an hour, right? So with this structure of particles, sparse structure of particles constantly being replaced, rotating at thousands of kilometers an hour, at the same time, Earth is rotating around the sun even faster, and at the same time, our galaxy is just moving at breakneck speed through the universe, and here we are trying and thinking that we can be in control of things. Right? It's pretty pathetic, isn't it? So, as I said yesterday, the only constant is change, right? So, with that in mind, let's move on to Agile project management. So today, I'm going to just give you a flavor of a real-world project that I was involved in, to kind of give you some idea of the complexity of things. And then we'll talk about where is Agile today, and then we'll dive into Scrum, which is one Agile methodology. So this is an old sin of mine. I was involved in internet advertising for a large part of my career outside of academia, and these are display ads that they are showing to you in order to monetize their media. Now that the world is different with digital media, and this is kind of how it works, display advertising, right? So we have a user who visits some page, requests some page. The page responds with some HTML, this kind of stuff you know. The reader or the browser typically on the client side is parsing through this HTML and looking for if it needs to go collect some other resources in order to present the result to the user, the end user, right? And when it comes to advertisements, so this is some form of tag, some image tab typically in the HTML, and so that is being requested from some other server typically, because the guys who actually produce and serve the content for this website, for websites in general, they are not serving the ads. They're typically outsourcing, hiring that services from somebody else, like Google, for example. Right? So a request for this ad, for which there was a tag in the HTML, is sent to this ad server. Right? This ad server then makes some calculations in order to determine which ad should I serve to this particular request. And I might know where this user is located, because I can do a geo-mapping of the IP address. I might know what time of day it is. I might know which page this ad was served on and which section that is. So the ad server uses a lot of kind of signals in order to try to figure out which is the best ad to show to this particular user right now, right? And so there's a lot of computation happening before it actually decides which ad to return to the user. There are publishers here who actually own the websites, and they might slice and dice their website. They might say, you know, here's a finance section, and I know that the advertisers who are interested in advertising in the finance section, they're willing to pay more than the advertisers who are advertising in the entertainment section of the website or whatever it is, right? So the publisher is kind of doing some guesswork based on how much they think they will be able to charge for advertising. And the advertiser has some form of UI, so the advertiser wants to run some campaign for something, and this UI allows them to specify where do I want my ads to be shown, who do I want to reach with my ads, etc. So here's a sample ad campaign. Say that we want to show 10 million ad impressions in January, and we only want to target users in Scandinavia, only show it to users in Scandinavia, because it might be a product or a service that's only available in Scandinavia. We want to show it between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. for some reason, because we think that the people we want to reach, that's when they are online, right? Or that's when they would be visiting this particular website. We want to advertise in the finance section of the site. And for some reason, we want to show green ads to the Swedes and blue to the Danes. And we also don't want to show any user the same ad more than twice, right? Because people might get sick of these ads if they see them too many times. Right? On top of that, we want to optimize the click-through rate, right? Because we're actually interested in not only in branding something, but we're actually interested in engaging them in some form of interaction after they click on the ad. Right? So we want them to click on the ad. Right? So this is a pretty typical ad campaign. Right? Now, is that the way I showed? Here we go. This is kind of a rough kind of architectural overview of an ad service system, the way it looked when, like, 7 or 8 years ago at least. So we have a number of ad servers who actually all they do is serving ads, right? We have some UIs both for the publishers and the advertisers, where they can specify, publishers specify how they want to divide their property into, which areas they want to be able to sell to advertisers. And the advertisers specify, they pick among these things and specify how they want to target things, right? And some stuff gets stored in transactional database, and some is simply in a reporting database. Now, here's a project. Behavioral targeting. So observation here is that ads in the finance section can be priced higher than ads in other sections. Right? Now, so here's the idea. Well, we could actually price ads higher in other sections as well if we know that it's a finance section reader. Right? We know, because typically advertisers are interested in reaching an audience. They typically don't care that much where they reach that audience. Reaching the audience is more important than where they do it. Right? So why don't we offer advertisers the option to target finance readers? Not only the finance section, that might be sold out, right? Because that, you know, because the big guys have already grabbed that. But so as a publisher, I want to see, can I squeeze some more value out of the visits that I get to other sections of the site? And this would be one way of doing it, right? So, doesn't sound that difficult. Now, if we look at this system again, I've marked those orange that would need to be modified in order to support something like that. Right? So essentially, every single subsystem needs modification in order to pull off something like this. Right? And in the organization that's maintaining and developing this, there's a lot of maintenance. You need to kind of grease the wheels, right? You need to keep the business running, the system running. We have a number of projects going on at the same time. Engineering teams tend to be specialists. This was the case that we had in my organization, that we were people who only worked in the ad servers, right? There were people who only worked on the UI, and typically even teams that only worked in the ad servers. We have more than 300 engineers here, and we're really concerned with time to market. So it's an extremely complex problem. Okay. This is the slide from kind of yesterday. So issues with traditional methodologies, that they assume a predictable world. Clear requirements are known. The world grinds to a standstill while we develop this. Stakeholders don't change their minds, and availability of resources does not change. And nothing new, more important comes up. And if there's one thing that if you ask developers, what is the most annoying thing with your job? Oftentimes they say, they change the requirements on me, right? They just, typically developers want to have, here are the requirements, and now, okay, so you say, okay, now you go away, and I will build this for you, but don't change your mind. But the thing is, people change their minds all the time. And you can't blame them for it, because it could be because of the competitive landscape changes. It could be, you know, so don't take it personally if they change their minds. But it is annoying when they change their minds all the time. And so one of the beauties of Agile is, since we do things in iterations and incrementally, between iterations, it's okay for them to change their minds. So we say to them, this is kind of a middle road here, right? We say, okay, during one iteration, you're not changing your mind. between iterations, you can change your mind as much as you want. Right? So it's kind of a middle of the road here. Because the product folks, they would like to be able to change their minds all the time, but that annoys the developing team, and the developing team would prefer no changes at all. So this is kind of a happy medium here. Okay, during the iterations, you don't change anything. Between iterations, you do whatever you want. So, agile software development. So, it relies, this is one key here, it relies on empirical data. In order to be able to change your mind, you need empirical data as to drive the decisions in order to change your mind. And it relies on short feedback loops. So continuous deployment is critical for this to really work well, because continuous deployment provides you with customer feedback. Continuous integration provides you with quality feedback. And in order to be able to react to all this feedback, you also need kind of good engineering practices, such as continuous refactoring. Right? You constantly need to refactor your code in order to be able to adapt to the product manager's requests to make changes. Right? Because you don't know from the beginning exactly where you're going. You know the direction, but you need to be kind of nimble so that you can adjust the direction based on what the product manager says. So, Agile today, we'll get into Scrum in a little bit. So this is from a survey from 2016, I think. So when they ask companies, how do you benefit from Agile? And they say, 87% say the ability to change, to manage and changing priorities, right? So that's a big improvement from the product side. Increased team productivity, which is kind of a little bit surprising, but it is what it is. And improved project visibility, and we talked about that yesterday. 58% are using Scrum. 10% are using Scrum together with XP. Right? So Scrum is becoming the de facto standard for agile development. Right? Then, of course, there are some Kanban might be increasing a little bit, and there's also now Scrum Ban, which is a kind of a happy marriage, or I don't know, unhappy marriage maybe between a Scrum and Kanban. I don't know. I never used it. And the top agile techniques is daily stand-ups, prioritize backlogs. These are requirements. We'll get to that. Short iterations, retrospectives. I will get to that too. And iteration planning. So, it sounds great, right? This is, companies are kind of raving about the advantages that they get out of Agile. So I would say that Agile is a disruptive social technology, and it fundamentally changes how any organization pursues its mission, how any group of people pulls something off. It's a different way of working. So, great, right? So, let's go Agile. Well, the thing is, it's hard. It's simple and difficult at the same time, right? The problem here is typically people. Biggest hurdle, as is the case with most things in life. If it weren't for people, you know, life would be pretty easy. So, you need to make sure that the people understand why. Why are we doing this? And it must be clear at all levels of the organization. Typically this starts, and we will get to this a little bit later here, typically Agile methodology starts in the development organization. Right? Because it came out of there. It came out of a reaction to essentially what I showed yesterday about why do projects fail. Right? So what can we do about this? As a whole industry, what can we do about this? Because we're losing credibility here. Nothing is ever delivered on time. Everything is too buggy. It doesn't deliver the business values. So we need to do something. So how can we as an industry do something about this? And this kind of led to the birth of Agile in 2000. I think it was kind of formalized in 2000 or 2001 or something like that. So this is also results of the same survey. So why do companies fail when they switch from the traditional way of building things to an agile way of building things? Company philosophy or culture. Right? Lack of experience, lack of management support, lack of support for cultural transition, inconsistent practices, external pressure to follow traditional waterfall processes, ineffective collaboration, etc., etc. And so here are some pitfalls. Agile relies on self-managing teams, and we'll get to that too. So you need to get away from this micromanagement culture, right? You tell people exactly what to do, or rather tell people how to do it. You just need to tell them what you want them to deliver and then go away. Let them figure it out themselves. And if you think about it, the hierarchical management structure that we have in pretty much every organization today, right, is based on the assumption that the doers at the bottom of the pyramid, who are actually doing the work, the rest are really just managing stuff, the doers don't know what to do. That's kind of the assumption. They need direction, right? Somebody, or directives. Somebody needs to tell them what to do. Well, that might have been the case when you built railroads, but if you think of who are the doers today, well, most of them are highly educated knowledge workers. And like yourselves, right? I mean, you don't react that well to somebody telling you exactly what to do, right? So that whole model of how to organize a large group of people in order to accomplish something together, that is different today from what it was 100 years ago when that model came about. It actually came about in the 1800s or something when they built the railroads in the US. So a new way of, if you want an organization to thrive, you cannot have this command and control structure anymore. It's not going to work. Right? And this is recognized, widely recognized, but how do you convince people that? Because that's how we've always done things, right? And the people who would have to change the most here are those in the higher management ranks, right? And those are the ones sitting on the authority to make decisions, right? So it's a tough one. I mean, do you really want to kind of reorganize yourself out of the organization? I mean, there's few people who are so altruistic that they say that they would be prepared to say, you know what, we can actually eliminate my position. Right? So micromanagement, individual reward systems, individual incentive systems no longer work if you have an agile processes, because it's about the team. You stand and fall with the team. Individuals are no longer held responsible outside of the team. Inside of the team, individuals are held responsible towards each other, but outside of the team, it's a team who's responsible. It's not the individuals, right? So you need to incentivize the team. it increases transparency. Agile increases transparency. And not everybody is comfortable being transparent, because there's a lot, especially at the top, right? There's a lot of dirty shit there that they don't want anybody to know, right? This is kind of also stand and fall with a team. Many organizations say this: well, you know, this agile thing might, yeah, it might be promising, but we are different. So I don't think it's going to work here. It might work in other places, but we are so special that, I don't think it works here. Seen that many times. This is about, you've probably seen this one, right? And this is there in order to exemplify the difficulty in actually getting customer involvement. Because a typical customer provides you with the requirements, and then they want you to go away and come back when you're done. But in Agile, you need to, since we do it incrementally and iteratively, we want to show it. Frequently, we want to show the customers, is this okay? Are we on the right track here? So not getting hold of your customer is a problem, even though you mean well when you want them to come to you and you want to show them things. That's not how they typically work. A lacking definition of done in the iterations. Because if you're not really clear with what the team is not in agreement as to what it means when something is done, you're going to create, you're just going to build up kind of technical debt over time. Right? So eventually you're going to hit the wall. Vision, the product. This is the kind of the product manager. The product manager might feel that since they cannot specify everything from the get-go and tell the team to build this, they might lose a little bit of control. Even though what they compare to is a false sense of certainty. Because before they deliver this thick bunch of papers with requirements, expecting that all of that would get done by a certain release date, even though they know that it never happened before, that it got done, it still gives them a sense of security to be able to hand that over and somebody saying, yeah, I will do this, despite the fact that I've never succeeded in pulling it off in the past. Right? So we should not disregard this gravitation towards the familiar. Even if the familiar is miserable, at least it's kind of the devil you know, right? The devil you know is better than uncertainty for a lot of people. This one, what was that one about? Yeah, this is a product owner, not because if you don't prioritize what to do, you will build the wrong thing. So Agile requires product folks who actively know and prioritize what needs to be done, what they want done. So, Scrum in 100 words. It's an agile process that allows us to, I'm just going to read this, allows us to focus on delivering the highest business value in the shortest time. It allows us to rapidly and repeatedly inspect actual working software every 2 weeks to 1 month. The business sets priorities, teams self-organize to determine the best way to deliver the highest priority features. Every 2 weeks to a month, anyone can see real working software and decide to release it as is or continue to enhance it for another sprint, another iteration. That's Scrum. So now, even though Scrum, and we will revisit this in the end here, even though Scrum came out of Agile, and Scrum specifically, came out of the need to improve software development, Scrum in itself has nothing to do with software development. Scrum is a project management methodology. It can be applied to a marketing effort. It can be applied in HR. It can be applied in finance. It just came out of software development. And that's not too bad for us because it's something that we're pretty familiar with. So this gives you some idea of Scrum versus traditional. So the client says, I want to go there. This is what I want you to build for me. Right? The client's this is what they tell you that they want you to build for them. Turns out that they don't really know at that point in time that once they get that, they would not be happy with it. Because all they have is some thoughts and ideas of what they want. Right? So what you do, traditionally, you would simply go there. Right? You would actually specify the requirements and you would give them to the team and the team would build something and you would end up there. Right? Client would not be happy. It could be that they are happy, but they're not likely to be happy. So in Agile instead, or in Scrum in particular then, you set out kind of roughly in that direction. Right? Roughly in that direction. And after the first iteration, you show the client what you've done, and the client says, well, yeah, but I think we need to go in that direction. And we go there, eventually you end up kind of right on this path to what they initially wanted. But when they get there, they realize, I don't want to go that direction because it doesn't really work. I thought it would work, but it doesn't work. So I'm going to go that direction instead. So eventually you end up with a happy client, right? It has required that the client has been involved in the process, right? Otherwise you would never get there. And another way to look at it is this. You're not starting by building the wheels and eventually you get the car. You're starting by building something you can make use of, and then you improve that and add features to that. Right? And eventually you get this car instead of that car. Apparently the client wanted that. So Scrum, it kind of came about in the, this Agile stuff came kind of later. Scrum came earlier, and then it was kind of generalized in a way. So it came about in the initial Scrums in 1993. So it was essentially Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber. And I actually had and there's an enormous amount of literature available on Scrum today. And I actually had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time with Ken Schwaber. We actually, when I was at this company, DoubleClick, we actually engaged him to completely transform our processes, and I will return to that also later on. Extremely wide adoption. It's used everywhere today. And not for specific types of applications or systems, but anything really. It has nothing to do. It's no better suited for one thing than another. So just going to go through this again. So individuals, this is the Agile Manifesto. So we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And responding to change over following a plan. So this is kind of how it works. Typically, you have some analysis and then design, coding, and testing phase, a traditional way of building software. So, and the analysis typically gets done before you do the design, and you need the design done before you actually start coding, and you need to have the coding done before you start testing. right? And in Agile, you do a little bit of everything at a time instead. Of course, you need to do some analysis before you can start the design, and you need to do a little bit of design before you start the coding, and you need to do a little bit of coding before you start the testing. But what this says, you don't need to do everything on one task before you start the next task. So, characteristics of Scrum. So, self-organizing teams. The product progresses in a series of 2 to 4 week sprints. You guys are going to have 1 week sprints because it's for educational purposes, really. There are very few companies who are able to do 1 week sprints because it's a big challenge, because you're supposed to analyze, design, code, and test within 1 week. It's a tall order, right? 2 weeks, I would say, seems to be the industry norm, though, right? But that requires, if you want to be able to actually release after those 2 weeks, you better make sure that you have good automation. Because if you need to do all the testing within those 2 weeks as well, that's not going to happen unless you've automated pretty much everything. Requirements are captured in something called the product backlog. It's just a list of requirements. We'll get to that too. And Scrum says nothing about engineering practices, right? You can, like XP, for example, is mostly about engineering practices. And there's no reason you cannot you can run XP within Scrum. Scrum is a project management methodology. XP has to do with engineering, right? And as I said, Scrum has nothing to do with software even. So a sprint is an iteration, fixed length. Sprints are fixed length. It leads to a better rhythm. And as I mentioned, product is designed, coded, and tested during 1 sprint. And this I already mentioned, no changes during a sprint. So if the product guy comes to you during a sprint, you can just do this. I mean, of course, you shouldn't be doing that, but you should ask them what do you want, because the product owner might simply want you to make it a little bit lighter blue, and then you can accommodate that, right? But in general, they're gonna itch to change their minds, and this becomes the role of the Scrum Master to say no. The Scrum Master's role is to protect the team from external disruptions during the sprint. So this is kind of how it works. So on the very left here, we have this product backlog, which contains product features expressed as user stories. Right? And this originates from input from customers, from the market, from stakeholders in the company. That's what the input that results in the product backlog. And the product backlog is the responsibility of the product owner to make sure that this is up to snuff. Right? Now, there's a sprint planning meeting at the beginning of every sprint. And at the sprint planning meeting, the team looks at the prioritized list of user stories, prioritized product backlog, and they select out of these stories, out of these features, the team selects what they can commit to finish in the upcoming iteration. Right? So the product owner's role here is to prioritize this. The product owner has no right to tell the team that you need to do this. If they want that, well, then you put it at the top of the list. Right? The product owner cannot say that, well, I know you selected these top 4 stories here. Maybe think you can do the fifth one as well? You know, I'm sure you can pull that off as well. Has no right to say that. The team can just say, no, we decide. We decide what we do. Or rather, we decide how much we do. You decide what we do. We decide how to do it. So a number of features are then translated into actual tasks. Right? A feature might be, say, add a persistent search field on every page on the site, for example. And that might translate into technical tasks, such as modify a number of packages or whatever it is. Right? And we'll get to that too. And so the sprint backlog is the set of tasks, technical engineering tasks. It could be design tasks as well. Everything that needs to be done, actually done, in order to pull off the features that the team has committed to doing. And then the sprint starts. Right? And during the sprint, the team members, they take tasks from the product from the sprint backlog, and they work on these tasks. They might finish some of the tasks and update tracking and stuff. We'll get to that too. And so the team, so you're going to have 1 week sprints, and every day there's a daily meeting. And the daily meeting is called a daily scrum, and we'll talk about that in detail. It's essentially updating, committing to each other, telling each other what you're doing, and telling each other what you will do before the next meeting. And when the sprint is over, ideally you have a shippable product increment. You pulled off a new number of features, and those features can now be deployed to your customers. And then there's a retrospective. After the sprint is over, there's a retrospective where the team is kind of reflecting on how did it go? How did this sprint go? Is there anything that worked well that we should continue to do? Is there anything that didn't work that well? Maybe there was problems with the communication or something. Well, then we need to do something about that. So it's a way, in a way, it's a way to be agile. Right? It's a way, it's kind of acknowledging the fact that maybe we didn't get it right from the beginning, but we need to modify our behavior in order to make things better. So constantly seeking empirical data, both in the development process, but also in the process of how we're working together, seek empirical data and use that in order to improve your productivity. So now we'll get into these in, let's see what time it is. So let's take, before we start this, let's take 10 minutes here. No, this is red. And we're back. So let's continue with Scrum. So I'll go through these 6 and 4, 10 items. So like what are the different roles in the Scrum implementation? What are the different ceremonies, meaning meetings, that will happen? And what kind of artifacts are being produced throughout the process? So the roles. So we have a product owner, a Scrum Master, and a team. And so the guy at the bottom here is the bottom right is the product owner. So the role of the product owner is defines the features of the product in terms of user stories, which we will get to. Decides on the release date and content. There's nothing to do with the team. I mean, they might interact with the team in order to come up with these dates and the content. If they don't, chances are they will overpromise, underdeliver. The product owner is responsible for the profitability of the product, right? So the product owner is kind of the single ringable neck here, right? The team, the idea of the team is just a well-oiled engine, right? At the disposal of the product owner. But if the team doesn't deliver, it's the product owner's problem. Of course, if there are poor developers on the team, the product owner will probably go talk to somebody who's responsible for hiring and engineering and telling them, you know what, this guy or this girl is not up to snuff. You need to replace this person because they're not helping at all. The product owner prioritizes features based on market value, right? And this is important that they do that because otherwise you wouldn't know that you're building the most important things. Adjust features and priority prior to every iteration. So at every time you walk into a sprint planning meeting, the product backlog with user stories needs to be prioritized. Right? It's the product owner's job to do that. And the product owner can accept or reject work results. So when you present something at the end of the sprint, we're going to get to that at the sprint review, the product owner might say, yeah, you know what? You have actually built what I asked you to build, but I realize now that that's not really what I wanted. That's okay. Right? Or the product owner might say, well, you didn't really build what I asked you to build. So they might reject work results. It's up to them. You're just a cog in the engine. The Scrum Master is responsible for enforcing the Scrum values and practices. Responsible for removing barriers. So if there's some need that the team has, which they cannot deal with by themselves, they might need access to a virtual server, for example. Right? And if the team doesn't know how to figure that out, it's the Scrum Master's responsibility to kind of remove those hurdles, to make sure that the team gets what it needs in order to do their jobs. Also needs to ensure that the team is functional and productive. Make sure that there's close collaboration. And, as I mentioned before, shields the team from external interferences. The team, typically 5 to 9 people, cross-functional. So you have all different types of expertise on the team. You're supposed to be able to, there should be skills appropriate for the entire stack that you have on the team. So you don't have one UI team and one middleware team and one database team. You have in this direction instead of that direction. The team selects work for the sprint. They're self-organizing. So it's of no business to the product owner how things are done, right? And the thing here is that since the team is selecting the work, the perceived accountability among the team members for actually pulling it off is way higher compared to if the work is assigned to you. Right? Because you decide how much you want to commit to, and now you kind of tend to feel accountable for what you've committed to doing. And if that means that you need to reorganize the distribution of tasks, well, so be it, if the purpose of it is to meet the sprint goal, to actually deliver what you committed to delivering. You don't want to change, really. Ideally, you don't want to change at all members on a Scrum team, because the more people work together, the better they get to know each other, and you know, there's like informal communication patterns that arise, and replacing people might disrupt what is going on. Typically takes a while for the team to kind of gel, really, to get to know each other, how to work together. So those are the 3 roles. We have 4 different kinds of ceremonies: planning, review, retrospective, and daily Scrum. Let's see here. The planning meeting, input to the planning meeting is the capacity of this team, and we'll get to that. How much do they traditionally, historically produce? The product backlog, which is the stories that the product owner wants you to implement. Business conditions might change. What the current state of the product is valuable to take into account, as well as technology, what technology expertise you have, what new technologies are becoming available, etc. And so what happens at this meeting is that first the team, together with the product owner, analyze and evaluate the product backlog. So they might look at the first story in the product backlog, which might say then, add a search field, a persistent search field on all pages. Okay, then I might ask the product owner, what exactly do you mean by that? Where do you want this search field to be? Depending on where I am, do you want the results page to look different, or should it look the same all the time? This is stuff that comes up through conversations with the product owner. This is not written down by the product owner, but because we want this user story to be succinct and understandable. And we'll get more to that as well, the user stories. And then the team selects some form of overarching sprint goal. And then, so there's 2 phases to the sprint planning meeting. The first phase involves the product owner as well, because you want to gather more details about what the product owner wants you to do. The second phase has nothing to do with the product owner. Here, you actually break down these user stories into tasks, engineering tasks. And for each task, you actually estimate how long will this task take. How long do you expect it to take? And that generates the sprint backlog. And this meeting is typically 4 to 8 hours. For you, it would probably be 1 hour or something like that. So the sprint planning meetings. So the team selects the user stories from the product backlog, and they create their sprint backlog, identify tasks. No task can be bigger than 16 hours. If it's bigger than 16 hours, that means that you don't know what you're doing. Right? Then you break it down into smaller things. You need to break it down into smaller things. And not only that, not only don't you know what you're doing, but also it will be difficult to track progress. If you have a task that's 40 hours, how do you track progress of that? And this is collaborative. So you don't yourself decide exactly what the tasks are, but the team as a whole decides what the tasks are. And you might consider some high-level design at this. So here's an example. So the user story here is some travel website. As a vacation planner, I want to see photos of the hotels. And this might result in 5 different tasks. You need to code the middle tier, the UI, might write some test fixtures, code some new class, and update performance tests. So a sprint, as I said, it's typically a 4-week iteration. You're going to have 1-week iteration. And the key here is sustainable pace. You commit to the work that you expect to be able to pull off. And straddling a sprint, it's a sprint planning meeting and a sprint review meeting at the end. And as I said, the product owner is not allowed to change their mind during the sprint. Daily scrums, this is the daily meeting. 15 minutes. Stand up. It's not for problem solving. The whole world is invited to this meeting. Anybody can come and listen into this meeting, but only the team members and the scrum master is allowed to say anything at all. Right? The product owner can be there to just lurking, listening in, see how it's going. Not allowed to say anything in this meeting. And this, I mean, you might think there's a lot of meetings here, but no, this is 15 minutes a day, right? And those 15 minutes eliminate a lot of communication that needs to be happening anyway. And so what happens at this meeting? Everyone answers 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And is anything in your way? And as it says here, this is not the status for the Scrum Master. Sometimes the Scrum Master is looking the other way, because it tends to be the case that you sit around a table or you stand around a table and people are asked these questions one after the other, and they tend to speak to the Scrum Master as if the Scrum Master is some form of boss or something, right? But this is not what this is about. This is about updating your fellow team members of what you've done and committing to them what you're going to do before next meeting. That's all it's about. The sprint review. So at the end of the sprint, there's a review where the team presents what they have done in that sprint. Typically a demo or something. It's informal and 2-hour maximum preparation time. This is for 4-week sprints. You shouldn't spend more than 30 minutes preparing for this meeting. No slides, only working stuff is being. Sometimes, of course, you might, if you want to, if one task has been to develop a database schema or something, it might be difficult to kind of show that working throughout the stack. So you might present something, but typically it's functionality that you're demonstrating. The whole team is there, and you can invite the world to that. And here the product owner is involved, because here the product owner is saying yay or nay when you present. You're essentially going through user story by user story that you've committed to, demonstrate that to the product owner, and for each one the product owner says yay or nay, or says yay, but you need to add and modify this. And that will then generate a new user story that gets put on the product backlog to be prioritized by the product owner, because it might be that even though they want some modifications of what was a high priority 1 week ago, today something else might be more important. So these modifications might be pushed down the product backlog. It's entirely up to the product owner what they feel is the most important to do. Following the sprint review, so we have the sprint planning in the beginning, then we start the sprint, we have the daily scrums every day, and at the end of this week, you're presenting what you've done in the sprint review meeting, and following the sprint review meeting, there's a sprint retrospective. And at the sprint retrospective, as I mentioned before, the team gathers and discusses that what they would like to start doing, stop doing, continue doing. Artifacts. The product backlog. So this is a list of user stories. And they are expressed in such a way that they show the values to the users, to the customers. Prioritized by the product owner and reprioritized prior to every sprint planning meeting, as I mentioned. An example, also some form of hotel site, I guess. As a guest, I want to make a reservation. And there's some story points here which we will get to. As a guest, I want to cancel a reservation. As a guest, I want to change the dates of a reservation, etc., etc. So this is kind of the level at which user stories are expressed. So it's clear. It's the kind of language that the customer might use. There's another one. As a customer, I should be able to browse through the flower collection in an easy way so that the buying experience is pleasant, for example. The sprint goal, I mentioned that it's kind of a short statement what the sprint is about. The sprint backlog. Right? So this is the tasks that result from the user stories on the product backlog. So the sprint backlog has a number of tasks, and individuals sign up for these tasks. So work is never assigned to anybody. Of course, I mean, if you know that somebody is really good with some technology, much better than you are, then you probably don't want to take that task because you are interested in the collective effort, maximizing the productivity of the team. Estimated work remaining is updated daily. Every day, every time you work on a task, you need to update how many hours are left of that task, and we'll get to that too. Any team member can modify the sprint backlog. Because it might be that one team member realizes that, you know what, the stuff that I did in this task means that this task doesn't need to be done really because I did that as well in this particular task. So I delete that task from the sprint backlog. Or I might realize that, shit, you know, we forgot that we need to do this as well. So it means that I can add, then if I do that, I add a task to the sprint backlog. So at any point in time, the sprint backlog reflects reality to the best understanding of the team as to what needs to be done, what else needs to be done, what remains to be done. Yeah. So here we have an example of a sprint backlog. So on Monday, so these are hours with these 5 tasks. And after Monday, or after Tuesday rather, so it seems here that somebody started to work on the testing of the middle tier, which was initially estimated to take 8 hours. They might have put in 24 hours, but realized that even after those 24 hours, I probably have like 16 hours left of this. So how much work you have done is irrelevant. The sprint backlog is gauging how much work is left. It doesn't matter what you've done. We're focusing on getting everything done, so the only thing that matters is how much is left. Right. So there's no, I mean, of course, most of the time these numbers are going to go down, right, the number of hours left, but sometimes they go up. You see here, like coding the user interface here. Put in a few hours on Monday. On Tuesday, they estimated that there was 4 hours left. Did some more work on it and realized that they forgot something. So now there's 8 hours left. So bad news, but it's, you know, at least it's reflecting reality, right? Now, a sprint burn down chart. So the y-axis here is the number of hours, the number of aggregated hours remaining in the sprint. Right? So on 4/29, we had something like 780 hours left. The next day, we had realized that even though we did work, we found new things. We realized that our estimates were kind of off. So the number of hours that left actually went up. And then it went up again the next day. And then it starts to go down. And eventually, by the time the sprint is finished, it should be at 0. Right. It's an example of this. So we're starting on Monday, and so we have, what is that, 44 hours left. On Tuesday, we have 30 hours left, even though one of the tasks, as the testing the middle tier, actually went up. On Wednesday, etc., etc. So this is something that if somebody comes and asks, how is it going? Are you gonna meet? Are you gonna deliver what you promised to deliver? You can just send them to this. This will give you an idea of whether we're going to deliver or not. This, to the best of our knowledge, this is representing our trajectory. Right? So complete transparency as to how is it going. They don't need to talk to you. You just send them a URL to this. Yeah. Now, how do you scale this? Yes?
Så burn-down charter, det är mycket för typ, alltså, kundens, så här, för att de ska få återblick hur det går. För att det var väl ganska likt det där sprint backloggen. Alltså de var väl väldigt lika egentligen.
So the question here was, is the burn down chart mostly for customers? Because it's similar to the sprint backlog. Well, the burn down chart is really just another view of an instance of the sprint backlog, right? But what the burn down chart is that it depicts that over time, and by showing it over time, you get some sense of how where things are going. It's not for the customer though, for the end customer. It's not that degree of transparency that you're interested in. But for all the other stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and especially like the product manager, for them, that's a good source of information for them. For the customer, it's really the sprint reviews, where you show what you've done. So Scrum, typically, so you have 5 to 9 people in one team. So how do you, if you have a project that requires more than one team, and you know, sadly, most projects are of that nature. You know, I mean, here you kind of in during your education, most of the projects you do, you might be able to pull off yourself. And out in industry is not only one team, but it's multiple teams that are required to pull something off. And sometimes those teams are in different locations even, coming from different cultures. It's very, very difficult. But that said, I mean, Scrum has been used for big projects. And typically what you do is you're creating a Scrum of Scrums, right? So while these guys, the teams, meet every day, you have one representative from each team that might meet instead twice a week or something. Because in these kind of big projects, there's always interdependencies between different teams. So these need to be managed and tracked at the very least. But you don't want to involve everybody in all these meetings. You just pick representatives. Or you can have Scrum of scrums of scrums. Of course, every layer you add here adds complexity. So, just tell you what. So at DoubleClick, so we had like 300 engineers, and decided to implement Scrum. So we were using the traditional, or rather, bastardized ways of traditional software development processes, always trying to tailor it to our needs, and always failing, right? But didn't stop us from trying, and it shouldn't. So I was at a meeting with our owners at the time. The company had been publicly traded, and then they were acquired by a private equity company in 2001 or 2 or something like that. And so these owners, the new owners, they asked my boss in this meeting. They asked my boss, how is your, who was the CIO, right? So he's responsible for all the technology in the company. So they asked him, so how is it going? They asked him, how is your organization doing? Is it doing well? He said, yeah. And then they asked him, how do you know? And he had no idea. I mean, how do you compare, right? I mean, what do you compare yourself to? How do you know whether you're operating at close to your maximum capacity or not, right? It might be possible that you could be twice as productive, but how do you know, right? Do you compare yourself to other companies? I mean, that's really the apples and oranges comparison, right? I mean, different organizations are completely different, so even if one is more productive than the other, does it have to do with the engineering organization? The processes have to do with the other people, or how the business works? No idea, right? So, and it was also, so we had no metrics for performance of the engineering organization. We had a lot of tension especially between the engineering organization and the product management organization. In a way, as there should be, right? Because product management they should ask for much more than they could get, right? Because you want to push the engineering organization to deliver as much as you possibly can, right? So it's healthy in a way. At the same time, it would be nice not to have the tension. Could get personal sometimes. And we had I mentioned this already. We had incomplete requirements, which frustrated the engineers. And so we decided to implement Scrum. And really, the main reason to implement it, of course we wanted to become more productive, but the results were huge improvements in visibility, because now the product organization could see full insight, full transparency as to what is going on in the engineering organization. Before that, it was like a black hole. They just handed over the requirements and crossed their fingers and hoped for the best that we would deliver something 6 months later. And typically, we didn't deliver what they had asked for. It also improved in predictability, right? Because, and this is actually related to the user stories, which I will talk about after lunch. Now, say now that you have an engineering organization or a product development organization that's really humming, right? It's really a well-oiled machine. It's just cranking stuff out. Every week, we're cranking out new features ready to be deployed. Well, the problem is that the rest of your organization is operating in a traditional way. So IT says here, we're agile, you know. We're cranking out stuff very quickly. Marketing says, we need to know the complete feature set and delivery date up front so we can plan. Well, we're agile, so that's not how we operate. You tell us what you want and we deliver that to you. We can't tell you, Right? Well, we need to know because we need to market these things. How can we market it? Well, you know. So it requires changes, adaptation in other organizations, in sub-organization functions in the company as well, in order to be able to maximize the benefit that you get out of a productive product development organization. Right? Operations says we release according to our own schedule. Well, you know, we want to release weekly. You know, well, that's not what we're doing. Okay, well then you're not getting the benefit out of being able to release weekly. This is a big one. Legal. We write contracts to shift risk to the other party. Well, guess what? Say that I'm a consulting company and I have an agile methodology to build software. Right? Now a customer comes to me. They want me to do something. And traditionally, they have asked for a cost and a delivery date. And then they want me to go away and deliver at that cost at the date I have promised. Well, if we build things in an agile fashion, what I'm telling you is that if you tell me how much you're willing to pay, I will deliver as much as I can. Well, that's not good enough because I want to know what I'm buying. And this has led actually to an area called agile contracts, because there's an enormous number of lawsuits today related to disagreements on what was ordered and what was delivered. Right? So I went to a presentation, I think this was probably like 4 or 5 years ago now, where there was a lawyer from Gothenburg who talked about sprints. Right? So this is trickling out everywhere, this new way of working, and it's changing how we deal with partnerships. I mean, in Agile, you don't want a contract, really, or rather the kind of contract you want should include, well, the customer should be required to be involved in the development process. You need to come, if you want me to deliver what you want, the least you can do is come to me and let me show you where I am right now so that you can actually change your mind if you want to, or tell me that this is okay or this is not okay. Because if you don't do that, once I reach the delivery date, there's no chance in hell that I'm going to be delivering what you need. Right? What else here? Yeah. So it's trickling out in the entire organization. So summary here. Talked about the real world project. I just kind of gave you an idea of this double-click project, behavioral targeting. We looked at Scrum and we looked at Agile in general in society today. There's a number of resources here. There's any number of literature today about Scrum. A lot of good books. There is a fairly recent Scrum primer that you can. I can probably put that up on the CoursePress page. It's pretty like 25 pages or something, which really succinctly describes what it is. Okay, I think I'm done for the morning session. Any questions? No? Crystal clear as usual? All right, then I'll see you at 1:15 again. Thank you.
Okay,